You've agreed to things you wouldn't have agreed to if you'd had 10 more seconds to think. That's not weakness. It's design.
It really is.
Welcome to this Deep Dive. Today, we are bringing our week-long series, The Anatomy of Power, to its capstone exploration.
Right, the grand finale.
Exactly. We spent this whole week looking at the historical giants, the manipulators, the charismatic leaders who basically bent history to their will.
Yeah, the big personalities.
Right. But today, we are stripping away the personalities. We're leaving all the biographies behind and looking directly at the raw underlying circuitry of human compliance.
Which is, frankly, the most important part.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
We are looking at the exact psychological levers that cause you, me, and everyone else listening to say yes when we, originally and fervently intended to say no.
Which makes this the necessary conclusion to everything we've explored so far. I mean, because power, when you strip it down to its absolute core, it isn't just about force or coercion or, even having the biggest army. The most durable, effective forms of power are entirely invisible to the person being influenced.
They don't even know what's happening.
Exactly. They operate completely under the radar, nestled comfortably within the cognitive shortcuts of our own minds. When power is wielded perfectly, the person being influenced actually believes the decision was entirely their own.
Wow.
Yeah. So today, we are looking at the architecture of that invisible power.
And to do that, we have to talk about the man who literally wrote the playbook on it, Dr. Robert Cialdini.
The godfather of influence.
That's what they call him in behavioral science circles. But what fascinates me most about Cialdini, just looking through our source materials, isn't just that he's this brilliant academic.
Right. It's his methods.
Yes. It's how he actually gathered the raw data that formed his theories. I mean, he didn't just sit in a comfortable, sterile university lab running hypotheticals on 19-year-old college freshmen who, just needed course credit.
No, his methodology was unprecedented. And honestly, it carried a significant amount of personal and professional risk for rigorous social psychologists.
I bet.
Cialdini realized early on that to truly understand how influence functions in the unforgiving environment of the real world, he couldn't just observe from an ivory tower.
He had to get in the mud.
He really did. He needed to study the apex predators of persuasion, the people who relied on extracting compliance for their daily survival, the compliance professionals.
He just went out there.
He embarked on a 3-year period of undercover fieldwork. He actually infiltrated their training programs.
He went full method actor on the psychology world.
He really did. I mean, he answered newspaper ads for trainees. He went undercover and trained alongside door-to-door vacuum cleaner salespeople.
Oh, man, door-to-door.
Yeah. He sat in the claustrophobic boiler rooms of telemarketing call centers. He embedded himself with high-pressure charity fundraisers, corporate recruiters, advertising executives.
Just surrounded by it all day.
Exactly. He even spent time on used car lots, observing how salespeople physically moved customers around the vehicles.
That is wild.
He was observing influence in the wild, taking meticulous covert notes on the specific tactics that consistently work to extract compliance from everyday people under pressure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because going undercover is great for gathering stories, but, anecdotes aren't science.
And that is the crucial secondary phase that cements his legacy. He didn't just write a memoir about his time as a salesman.
Right.
He took all of those raw, field-tested observations back into the academic laboratory. He spent the next few decades rigorously testing these street-level tactics through highly controlled, peer-reviewed experimental research.
Yeah, to prove it.
He wanted to isolate the variables. He needed to know not just that a tactic worked on a used car lot, but precisely why it worked at a neurological and cognitive level.
Right, what's actually happening in the brain.
Exactly. What was happening inside the human brain to make these specific approaches so overwhelmingly effective. And he eventually distilled a mountain of data into a framework of core principles of influence.
But before we get into those specific principles, we need to talk about the engine running under the hood.
Yes, the mechanism.
Because none of Cialdini's framework makes any sense, and none of these tactics would work at all unless our brains were wired in a very specific, almost predictable way. You mentioned cognitive shortcuts earlier.
I did. The entire foundation of this deep dive rests on the cognitive mechanism of heuristics.
Heuristics?
Right. To understand this, we have to look at the sheer biological cost of thinking. The human brain makes up roughly 2% of our body weight, but it consumes about 20% of our daily energy.
That's a massive power draw.
It's huge. Active, deliberate, analytical reasoning, What behavioral economists call system 2 thinking is incredibly metabolically expensive.
So it really burns calories to think hard.
It does. If your brain had to engage in that kind of heavy lifting for every single micro decision you make in a day, you would literally become paralyzed.
You just freeze.
The cognitive load of deciding what to eat, how to navigate traffic, or, how to interpret a colleague's tone of voice would consume all your available glucose before breakfast.
Just blue screen. The system would crash from having too many tabs open.
That is precisely the right way to think about it. So to survive and function efficiently in an overwhelmingly complex world, the human brain evolved to rely on these heuristics.
The shortcuts.
These are cognitive shortcuts. It's an automatic, rapid processing mode, often referred to as System 1 thinking.
Okay, System 1.
These shortcuts allow us to make instant, usually accurate judgments based on a very limited set of reliable environmental cues.
Like what?
Well, for example, if an acknowledged expert in a highly technical field tells you a fact is true, your shortcut tells you it's safe to believe them.
Right, because they're the expert.
Exactly. The shortcut saves you the hundreds of hours of independent research required to verify the claim yourself. It's an elegant evolutionary efficiency mechanism.
I always like to think of this mechanism like a smartphone's autocorrect feature.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. It saves you an immense amount of time, and it works beautifully 99% of the time. You're typing fast, the phone predicts the word based on just a few letters and the context of the sentence, and boom, the word is there.
It just happens.
It operates entirely on automatic System 1 thinking. But precisely because it is an automatic algorithm, if someone knows how that algorithm works, they can confidently trigger it to input the entirely wrong response.
Yes.
You hit send before your conscious brain even realizes your phone just promised your boss you'd work the entire holiday weekend.
The autocorrect analogy captures the vulnerability perfectly. The very mental shortcuts that enable us to function efficiently in a complex, fast-paced world are the exact same mechanisms that create predictable, exploitable avenues for persuasion.
It's a double-edged sword.
It is. Because the response is automatic and largely subconscious, those who understand the triggers can activate the response strategically.
So they bypass the logic completely.
Exactly. The compliance is often extracted before your conscious analytical System 2 brain even realizes a decision has been presented.
Which brings up a really important boundary we need to establish for the listener right here at the top.
Good point.
Because when we spend an hour talking about triggering automatic compliance and, exploiting vulnerabilities, it sounds inherently nefarious. It sounds like a manual for con artists.
It does sound that way, but it is absolutely vital to recognize that these principles are entirely mechanism neutral.
Mechanism neutral.
Yes, they are just the invisible gears and pulleys of human cognitive architecture. There is no moralizing to be found in the mechanism itself.
It's just tools.
The exact same psychological levers are pulled, whether a pediatrician is trying to persuade a reluctant, fearful patient to take life-saving medication, or a sophisticated scammer is trying to drain a pensioner's bank account.
Wow, so the biological process is exactly the same.
The mechanism of influence is identical in both scenarios. The only difference, the only thing that separates legitimate ethical persuasion from unethical exploitation, is the intent of the person wielding the tool and the genuine, informed consent and benefit of the person being influenced.
It's just gravity. Gravity keeps the planets in a stable orbit, and gravity pulls a commercial airliner out of the sky if the engines fail.
Precisely.
The physical force doesn't care, it just operates. So let's look at the forces. Let's look at the specific triggers that bypass our analytical brains.
Where should we start?
We'll start with the social glue that holds humanity together. Reciprocity, or the profound power of indebtedness.
Reciprocity is arguably the foundational bedrock of all human social interaction.
Really the bedrock.
Oh, absolutely. From an evolutionary anthropology standpoint, early human societies could only survive, hunt, and evolve by developing a system of mutual aid and division of labor.
We had to work together.
Right. And that kind of cooperation requires an immense amount of trust, and trust requires a deeply ingrained, almost biological social rule. You must give back what you receive.
The golden rule of survival.
Exactly. If someone shares their food with you today, you are obligated to share your shelter with them tomorrow.
It feels like a psychological ledger that humans desperately need to balance.
Yeah.
Like if someone does me a favor, even a tiny one, it's like a bright red negative number appears on my side of the mental ledger.
And you feel it.
And it physically bothers me until I clear it.
That physical bother is the operative mechanism. The evolutionary discomfort of feeling indebted enforces an obligation to repay.
We just hate it.
We do. We are deeply socialized from childhood to detest the feeling of being a moocher or a taker. And where this biological quirk becomes a potent tool of influence is that this massive psychological obligation is triggered even when the initial gift or favor was entirely unsolicited.
Like the free sample at the supermarket.
Perfect example.
You didn't ask for the cube of cheese on the toothpick. You were just walking the dairy aisle. But once you eat it, the ledger is open, and suddenly you feel this weird pressure to buy a $12 block of artisanal Gouda.
The cheese sample is the perfect microexample. You didn't request it, yet the mechanism fires anyway. Furthermore, the repayment does not have to be of equal value.
Wait, it doesn't?
No. A very small initial favor can trigger a sense of obligation powerful enough to extract a disproportionately larger return favor.
Interesting.
One of the most famous and elegantly simple demonstrations of this in the literature is the restaurant mint experiment.
Oh, this study is a classic.
Right.
Break down exactly how this played out because the variables they tweaked are fascinating.
Okay, so researchers wanted to see how a tiny, seemingly insignificant, unsolicited gift would affect the tipping behavior of restaurant patrons.
The mints.
Right. They set up a controlled environment. In the baseline scenario, which served as a control group, a waiter simply brings the final bill to the table at the end of the meal.
No mints.
No mints. The tips follow the standard average for that restaurant.
Okay, makes sense.
In the first experimental condition, the waiter brings the bill, but includes one small, inexpensive chocolate mint on the tray for each diner.
And what happened?
That single mint, costing a fraction of a cent, raised the average tip by 3%.
Which, in the grand scheme of the hospitality industry, is a massive statistical jump for a piece of candy.
It is a significant bump, but the researchers wanted to test the elasticity of this mechanism.
They wanted to push it.
Exactly.
Right.
So in a second condition, the waiter brings the bill and gives 2 mints to each diner.
So double the mints.
Right. And the tips didn't just double. They shot up by a staggering 14%.
14%.
The larger the unsolicited gift, the heavier the psychological debt felt by the diners.
But the delivery is where the real manipulation happens, right? It's not just about the volume of the gift. It's about how the gift is framed to the target.
That is the most incredible and revealing part of the study. In the final third condition, the waiter brings the bill to the table, gives 1 single mint to each diner, smiles, turns around, and begins to walk away.
Okay.
But then he pauses. He stops in his tracks, turns back to the table, reaches into his pocket, and says something to the effect of, "You know what, for you nice people, here's an extra mint."
Oh, wow.
He then gives them a second mint.
So mathematically, it is the exact same 2 mints as the previous scenario. The material value hasn't changed by a single cent.
The material value is absolutely identical, but the tips in that final scenario skyrocketed by 23%.
23%.
Just for turning around.
Just for turning around, why? Because the mechanism of reciprocity was exponentially amplified by the perception of personalized, spontaneous generosity.
They felt special.
The diners felt they were receiving special treatment. The monetary value was practically zero, yet the psychological debt created by that customized gesture translated into a massive increase in actual hard cash left on the table.
That is wild. The automatic System 1 shortcut completely bypassed the analytical brain's basic understanding that a restaurant mint is essentially worthless.
That is brilliant, and it shows how easily our internal ledger can be hacked.
Very easily.
But that's about our relationship with other people.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when the ledger we are trying to balance is completely internal? When we transition from dealing with others to dealing with our own sense of self?
Then we leave reciprocity behind and move into the realm of commitment and consistency.
Principle number 2.
Right. If the first principle is about social debt, this one is about the powerful psychological drive to avoid cognitive dissonance.
Avoiding that mental friction.
Exactly. We have a fundamental, almost desperate need to be, and, crucially, to appear to others to be consistent with our past actions, our public statements, and our stated beliefs.
Because inconsistency is dangerous, evolutionarily speaking.
Exactly. Throughout human history, someone whose actions wildly contradict their words on a daily basis is unpredictable.
And you can't trust unpredictable.
And in a tight-knit tribe, unpredictability is a survival threat. We associate inconsistency with being erratic, untrustworthy, or, mentally unstable. Therefore, once we take a stand or make a choice, we lock ourselves into a behavioral trajectory.
We build a narrative around our actions.
We do. And the deeper the initial commitment, especially if that commitment is made actively, if it's made publicly in front of witnesses, or if it requires significant physical or mental effort to make, the more completely we lock ourselves in.
We trap ourselves.
Once that stand is taken, the human brain begins to internally generate new reasons to justify the choice. We build a massive mental scaffold to support the decision.
Even if it was a bad one.
The fascinating part is that even if the original reason for making the decision is completely removed, the scaffolding remains, and the person will continue to defend the choice.
Let's ground this with the foot in the door technique, because the driveway billboard study in the source material is a profound example of how extreme this drive for internal consistency can get.
Oh, the foot in the door study, originally conducted in a quiet residential neighborhood in Palo Alto, is the quintessential demonstration.
Walk us through it.
Researchers, posing as volunteer workers, went door to door and asked homeowners to agree to a very small, seemingly trivial request.
Yeah.
They asked if the homeowner would be willing to display a tiny 3-inch square sign in their front window that simply said, "Be a safe driver."
3 inches. That's tiny.
It was completely unobtrusive, practically invisible from the street, and supported an inarguable public good. Almost everyone agreed to display it.
Right. I mean, it costs you nothing. You get to feel like a good, civic-minded neighbor for about 30 seconds.
Precisely. Now, here's where the behavioral design kicks in. A few weeks later, a different set of researchers went back to those exact same homes.
The same houses.
The exact same ones. This time, they asked for a massive, highly intrusive favor. They asked the homeowners if they would allow a large, poorly lettered, incredibly ugly wooden billboard reading, "Drive carefully," to be installed on their front lawns.
A giant, ugly billboard.
Yes. The researchers even showed them a picture with the billboard completely obstructed the view of the house's architecture.
Which any sane, property value conscious homeowner would immediately reject. You'd slam the door.
And in a control group of people in the same neighborhood who hadn't been asked to put up the small sign first, the rejection rate was massive.
Of course.
Over 80% flatly said no. But among the homeowners who had previously agreed to display the tiny 3-inch sign, the results were entirely inverted.
Wait.
An astonishing 76% agreed to have the massive, ugly billboard installed on their pristine lawns.
Let me push back on this for a second, because that number is insane.
It is shocking.
Is this just plain stubbornness? Like, if they say no to the big sign, they feel like hypocrites, and people just hate admitting they've changed their minds.
The data suggests it goes much deeper than simple stubbornness or fear of looking hypocritical. It represents a fundamental neurological shift in self-image.
Self-image.
Yes. By agreeing to display that first tiny sign, those homeowners subtly, perhaps subconsciously, changed how they viewed their own identity.
So,
They began to see themselves not just as homeowners, but as the kind of person who takes active steps to support public safety. They adopted a new internal label.
wow.
When the researchers returned weeks later with the massive billboard request, refusing it wouldn't just be saying no to an ugly piece of wood, it would be violating their newly established internal identity.
Because they are a safe driving advocate now.
They had to say yes to remain consistent with who they now deeply believe themselves to be. The small yes didn't just extract compliance, it literally rewired their self-perception.
The consistency principle is identity defense. You aren't defending the billboard, you're defending your newly minted ego.
Precisely.
That is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But both reciprocity and consistency rely on a sense of individual identity or individual relationships. What happens when your internal compass isn't pointing anywhere?
That's a great question.
Like, what happens when you are thrown into a situation where you have no prior commitments, no existing relationships, and you simply don't know what to do?
That introduces our third principle, social proof, or as it's often called, the wisdom of the crowd.
Social proof.
The underlying mechanism here is uncertainty reduction. When human beings are placed in ambiguous, novel, or high-stress situations, the brain desperately looks for a shortcut to figure out the correct, safe behavior.
We just want to be safe.
And the most readily available, metabolically efficient shortcut is observing what everyone else is doing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I always conceptualize social proof like following taillights in a dense fog on the highway.
Oh, like that?
Right, you were driving at night, a thick fog rolls in, and you can't see the road lines, you don't know the exact curves ahead, you don't know if there's debris on the road, the anxiety spikes.
Because the uncertainty is high.
Exactly. But then you lock your eyes on the red taillights of the car, 50 feet in front of you.
Mm.
You have absolutely no idea who that driver is. You don't know if they're lost. You don't know their destination.
Right.
But your brain automatically assumes they can see the road better than you can, so you follow them implicitly.
That analogy perfectly captures the evolutionary utility of the mechanism. For our ancestors, if you saw the rest of your tribe suddenly running in one direction, the most efficient survival strategy was to start running with them immediately.
And ask questions about the predator later.
Exactly. That instinct saves us the cognitive load of having to assess every uncertain situation from scratch. The vulnerability arises because modern compliance professionals know exactly how to manufacture those taillights.
They build fake taillights.
They do.
Yeah.
They know that simply showing you that others have made a specific choice dramatically lowers your perceived risk of making that exact same choice.
You see this everywhere now with the digital algorithms. Trending on Netflix or bestseller, or the way TikTok displays view counts right on the video before you even watch it.
All manufactured social proof.
But the source material highlights the hotel towel reuse study, which shows just how surgical this can get.
The hotel study is a masterclass in nuanced behavioral design. Hotels have a massive financial incentive to get guests to reuse their towels. It saves millions in laundry, water, and labor costs.
Sure.
So behavioral researchers partnered with a hotel chain to test different messaging on those little placards left on bathroom counters.
We've all seen those.
They started with the standard environmental appeal. Help save the environment by reusing your towel. It was moderately effective, yielding roughly a 35% compliance rate.
Not bad.
Not bad, but then they switched the text to a social proof message. 75% of guests at this hotel reuse their towels.
Just knowing the invisible majority did it made people fall in line.
It did. That message significantly outperformed the environmental appeal. The guests outsourced their moral or practical decision to the aggregate behavior of previous guests.
Wow.
But the researchers went one crucial step further. They tapped into a vital amplifier of social proof.
Yeah.
The principle of similarity.
Similarity.
We don't just follow any random crowd. We follow the crowd that we identify with most closely. So they changed the placard one last time to read, 75% of guests who stayed in this specific room reused their towels.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Which, when you stop and engage System 2 thinking, is so incredibly specific that it's almost weird.
It is weird.
Why should I care what someone did in this exact bathroom 3 weeks ago?
Logically, you shouldn't. It has absolutely no rational bearing on anything. The people who stayed in that room previously are complete strangers.
Right.
You don't know their hygiene habits or their environmental politics, yet that hyper-specific message caused the highest spike in compliance across the entire study.
That's crazy.
The brain registered a localized similarity, people exactly like me in this exact same physical space. And the automatic heuristic triggered an overwhelming subconscious urge to conform to that highly specific, localized group norm.
Our brains just instantly outsource the decision-making the second we feel a localized connection to a crowd.
Instantly.
But let's follow the logic of the fog analogy a step further. What happens when the fog is so thick that there are no taillights? What happens when the crowd around you is just as confused and panicked as you are, and social proof completely fails to provide an answer? You don't look laterally at your peers anymore, you look up.
And looking up brings us directly to the fourth mechanism, authority, following the leader.
Authority.
This mechanism is deeply rooted in our socialized deference to expertise and hierarchical structures. From earliest childhood, we are aggressively conditioned to understand that obeying authority figures, parents, teachers, doctors, law enforcement, is generally beneficial.
It keeps you out of trouble.
It keeps society orderly, prevents chaos, and keeps us safe. But functionally, in adult decision-making, it is another massive efficiency hack.
Because I don't have the time or the cognitive bandwidth to go to medical school for 8 years just to decide if I should take a specific antibiotic for an infection.
Right.
I defer to the person with the MD on their badge.
Exactly the right application. Trusting a legitimate expert saves you the immense cognitive load of learning a complex subject from scratch. We rely on experts to navigate legal systems, medical crises, and financial markets.
That's very useful.
It is. But here is the critical, often dangerous vulnerability in the heuristic. Our System 1 brains respond to the symbols of authority just as strongly and just as automatically as they do to actual legitimate authority.
The symbols. Which brings us to the most famous and perhaps the darkest corner of psychological research. Stanley Milgram.
Yes. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments conducted at Yale University in the early 1960s are the definitive demonstration of this principle in action.
Set the scene for us.
The historical context is important here. Milgram was trying to understand the psychology behind the atrocities of World War II, specifically how seemingly ordinary citizens could participate in horrific acts under orders.
Right.
He set up a lab where participants were instructed to act as a teacher. They were ordered to deliver increasingly severe electric shocks to another person in the next room, the learner, who was actually an actor, whenever the learner answered a memory question incorrectly.
The shock generator had labels going all the way up to danger, severe shock, and XXX. And as the voltage supposedly increased, the actor in the next room would scream, bang on the wall, complain of a heart condition, and eventually fall deathly silent.
Yes, and despite the agonizing screams and despite their own intense, visible psychological distress, participants were sweating, trembling, stuttering, and pleading with the researcher to stop, a staggering majority of them kept pressing the button.
They kept going.
They delivered the maximum possible voltage simply because the researcher told them to continue.
I have to ask the question that everyone asks when they first hear about this study. Are we just naturally submissive?
It's the obvious question.
Do human beings just inherently fold and become subservient the second someone gives us a firm order?
The intuitive conclusion is that people are naturally submissive or even secretly sadistic. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of cognitive architecture, the data points elsewhere.
So it's not submission.
It's not about submission. It's about our desperate drive to be efficient and to be correct. We have a deep psychological need to make the right choice. In a highly ambiguous, immensely stressful, totally unfamiliar situation like Milgram's laboratory, the participant's brain is panicking.
They don't know what to do.
It desperately looks for guidance on what the correct behavior is and who is providing the guidance in that room. A calm, assertive researcher in a crisp white lab coat, holding a clipboard, operating within the prestigious ivy-covered walls of Yale University.
The symbols, the coat, the clipboard, the setting, the calm tone of voice.
The visual and auditory cues of authority completely short-circuited the participants' personal, moral judgment.
Wow.
Their analytical brains were overwhelmed by the stress, so their System 1 thinking defaulted to the deepest ingrained shortcut. Defer to the expert.
They just followed the taillights, but the taillights were a lab coat.
Exactly. The brain assumed the man in the lab coat must know what he was doing, must have a larger scientific purpose, and crucially, must bear the ultimate responsibility for the outcome. The authority principle is terrifyingly powerful because it can completely override our internal moral compass in favor of following the perceived expert.
The symbol overrides the substance. Okay, that one is heavy.
It is.
Authority is a top-down heavy pressure. Let's look at a completely different kind of pressure. A sideways, much softer pressure. Principle number 5, liking, the connection advantage.
Liking seems deceptively simple on the surface. We prefer to say yes to people we know and like.
Makes sense.
But the psychological mechanisms driving this preference and the ways it can be manufactured are quite complex. It relies heavily on a cognitive bias known as the halo effect.
The halo effect.
The halo effect occurs when one positive characteristic of a person dominates the way that person is viewed by others.
Like what?
If we register one positive attribute like physical attractiveness, a shared hometown, a similar sense of humor, or even just a friendly, complimentary demeanor, our brain automatically, subconsciously assumes they possess a host of other positive traits.
Like we assume they're smart.
We assume they are honest, intelligent, and trustworthy.
We let our guard down. I think of the liking principle like a VIP pass at an exclusive nightclub.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Usually a request or a sales pitch has to wait in a long line outside your brain. It has to get patted down by your logical security bouncers, show ID, empty its pockets, and prove its worth.
Right, System 2 doing its job.
But if the request is accompanied by the liking VIP pass, if it comes from an attractive person or someone from your hometown, the bouncers just unclip the velvet rope, smile, and wave it right through to the decision-making center of your brain without a pat-down.
The velvet rope analogy is perfect because it highlights the bypassing of critical analysis. When we feel a connection, rapport, or shared values with someone, our defensive barriers are drastically immediately lowered.
We just let them in.
We become highly receptive to their influence because we inherently trust that people we like won't steer us wrong. Historically, if we look at the pure monetization of this principle, there is no better example than the cultural phenomenon of the Tupperware party.
The legendary Tupperware party. A masterclass in weaponizing suburban friendships.
It was an absolute masterstroke of behavioral design, pioneered largely by a woman named Brownie Wise in the 1950s. The company didn't rely on anonymous, suited salesmen knocking on strange doors to sell plastic bowls.
No.
They relied entirely on your friends, your neighbors, and your family members to host a party in their own living rooms.
So the VIP pass was already firmly in your hand before you even walked through the front door.
The environment was entirely disarming. When you attend a Tupperware party, the commercial request to buy a set of food storage containers is inextricably tied to your social obligation, your shared history, and your genuine affection for the host.
It's brilliant.
You aren't buying from a faceless, profit-driven corporation. You are buying from Susan, your friend, who just served you iced tea, listened to your problems, and provided an afternoon of entertainment.
Oh, Susan.
The strength of the social bond completely overwhelms any objective System 2 assessment of whether your kitchen actually needs another set of mixing bowls.
You definitely don't need them.
But the liking principle effortlessly transmutes social capital into commercial compliance.
Susan gets us every time, because saying no to the plastic bowl feels like saying no to Susan.
Exactly.
All right, let's pivot from the social dynamics to the environmental dynamics.
Yeah.
What happens when the pressure comes not from a person, but from the availability of the resource itself?
Principle number 6.
Principle number 6, scarcity, the value of rarity.
Scarcity shifts the focus from who is asking to what is being offered. The power of scarcity is driven by two incredibly potent, evolutionarily hardwired psychological forces: loss aversion and psychological reactance.
Let's start with loss aversion.
Okay, a concept pioneered by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Humans are biologically hardwired to feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining something of equal exact value.
Twice as intensely.
Yes. Evolutionarily, this makes perfect sense. If an early human gained an extra day's worth of food, they were just comfortably full. But if they lost a day's worth of food, they might starve to death.
Survival prioritized focusing heavily on potential losses.
Exactly.
So when our freedom to choose an item is threatened because its availability is suddenly limited, we panic.
We experience a phenomenon called psychological reactance. When our options are restricted, we react by wanting the restricted item significantly more than we did before the restriction existed. The desire spikes dramatically.
It's the flashing red text on the hotel booking website. Only 2 rooms left at this price. Or the countdown timer on a shopping cart.
Those modern digital interfaces are masterclasses in applied weaponized scarcity. But what's crucial to understand about the mechanism is that framing any offer around what a person stands to lose is almost always vastly stronger than framing it around what they stand to gain.
Framing matters.
Enormously. Telling someone they will lose $50 a month on energy bills is more persuasive than telling them they will save $50 a month, even though the math is identical.
Let me push back here on the modern application. In the age of the internet, we are all incredibly cynical.
We are.
We know the hotel probably has more rooms they just haven't listed yet. We know the digital countdown timer on the mattress sale will just reset to 24 hours tomorrow morning. Doesn't our awareness that it's artificial scarcity ruin the psychological effect?
That is where the deep distinction between System 1 and System 2 thinking becomes absolutely vital.
How so?
Your analytical brain, Sister 2, can look at that countdown timer, eventually catch on, and rationally deduce that the scarcity is a manufactured marketing tactic.
Right.
But the initial visceral spike of FOMO, the fear of missing out, the sudden acceleration of your heart rate, is an automatic, involuntary physiological reaction governed by System 1.
It hits you physically.
The scarcity trigger bypasses the logical assessment and hits the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain. Even if you strongly suspect it's a trick, the mere thought of losing the opportunity creates a physiological urgency that is incredibly difficult to ignore.
Because what if it's real?
Exactly. The feeling of value becomes tied directly to the feeling of limited access, and System 1 demands you secure the resource before analyzing it.
The fear of missing out overrides the logic of knowing it's a trick. It's a powerful drug. Okay, we have arrived at the 7th and final principle, one which Cialdini actually added years after his original 6 were published, based on emerging research. Unity, the we factor.
Unity takes the concept of liking and pushes it to a much deeper, almost tribal, evolutionary level.
Beyond just liking someone.
Right. Liking is about affection. You like your mail carrier, you like your barber. Unity is about shared identity. It is the perception that someone belongs to the exact same in-group as you do.
The in-group.
This involves a psychological phenomenon called identity fusion, where the rigid mental boundaries between yourself and the group begin to blur. You cease to be just an individual and become part of a collective entity.
It's like a biological immune system.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, if a foreign body, like a virus, enters your bloodstream, your white blood cells immediately identify it as other and attack it. That's a stranger knocking on your door making a request.
Right.
But Unity tricks the brain into recognizing the request as its own DNA. It bypasses the threat detection system because the brain doesn't attack itself.
What an elegant way to frame it. The immune system analogy is spot on. When someone is perceived as one of us sharing a nationality, a religion, an alma mater, or even a deeply held political belief, influencing them feels entirely different.
Doesn't feel like persuasion.
It feels significantly less like external persuasion or coercion, and more like the target is acting in their own extended self-interest. Because in a fused identity, the influencer's success is biologically and psychologically tied to the group's success.
The university fundraiser study in our notes is a perfect isolated example of this immune system bypass.
It's a striking study. Researchers looked at door-to-door fundraising campaigns for a university.
Standard campaigns.
In the control group, when the callers used standard, polite pitches highlighting the good work the university was doing, the donations were average.
Okay.
But in the experimental group, they instructed the callers to simply add one specific targeted phrase to the exact same pitch. What was it? I'm a student here just like you.
Wow.
The moment they uttered that phrase, the donations exponentially increased. The moment the target recognized the caller as sharing their specific tribal identity and alumni of the same institution, their critical defenses vanished.
The bouncers just walked away.
The request was no longer coming from an external charity demanding resources. It was coming from inside the tribe.
So what does this all mean? We have laid out these 7 highly effective, entirely automatic psychological levers: reciprocity, consistency, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity, and unity.
The whole toolkit.
But from the source material we're looking at today, specifically diving into the SUE behavioral design framework, the real mastery of influence isn't just knowing the definitions of the 7 principles. Anyone can read a list.
Reading a list won't make you persuasive.
Right. The true architecture of power is how you put them together. Let's talk about stacking the deck, or compound influence.
This is the critical transition from understanding academic theory to engaging in actual strategic application in the real world.
The practical application.
If you just fire off these principles randomly at a target, what behavioral designers dismissively call the spray and pray method, you will likely fail, and you may even trigger massive reactance and push the person away permanently.
You'll just annoy them.
Exactly. Research and field observations show that master influencers build an architecture of power by sequencing these principles in a very specific compounding order.
There's a recipe, a psychological funnel.
There is a highly structured recipe, and it generally follows 3 distinct stages of escalation.
Walk us through the stages.
First, before anything else, you must cultivate the relationship. This is the foundation. This is where you deploy unity, liking, and reciprocity.
Establish the bond.
You establish a shared identity to bypass the immune system, you find genuine common ground to increase affection, and you provide unexpected, unsolicited value to open the ledger of indebtedness. You absolutely cannot skip this step.
Right, because you can't hit someone with a hard, high-pressure scarcity pitch if they don't even like you or trust you yet. You have to open the door before you can push them through it.
Exactly the right logic. If you start with scarcity on a cold target, they just see you as a threat.
Stage 2.
Once the relationship is cultivated and the defensive barriers are down, you move to the second stage, reducing uncertainty. The target likes you, but they are still unsure about the decision you want them to make.
They need those taillights.
This is where you bring in social proof and authority. You show the person that acknowledged experts agree with the proposed choice, and you show them that people just like them, their peers, their localized in-group, are already doing it safely.
You systematically remove the anxiety and the cognitive load of making a novel decision.
Precisely. So they like you, and they feel safe making the choice because everyone else is doing it.
But they still might just sit on the couch and do nothing. What's the final stage?
The final stage is motivating immediate action, overcoming inertia.
Pushing them off the fence.
This is where you deploy commitment and consistency. And finally, scarcity. You get a small, trivial initial agreement to shift their self-image, the foot in the door, and then you apply the immense pressure of limited availability or a closing window of opportunity to force the target off the fence.
The sequence builds an inescapable psychological momentum.
It really does.
To visualize this, imagine walking onto a car dealership lot. The master salesperson doesn't run up and yell, "This car is gone in 10 minutes."
No, that's out of sequence.
First, they offer you a cup of coffee and ask where you're from. "Oh, you're from Chicago. My brother lives in Chicago." That's reciprocity, liking, and unity. Stage 1 complete.
Beautifully executed.
Then they casually mention that this model won Car of the Year, and they've sold 3 to families in your exact neighborhood this week. Authority and social proof. Stage 2, uncertainty reduced.
Right.
Finally, they get you to agree that the color is nice and the seats are comfortable. Consistency before checking their watch and saying the financing deal strictly ends at 5 p.m. Scarcity. Stage 3, action motivated. It's a perfectly engineered funnel.
It is a meticulously designed gauntlet of human psychology. But alongside the sequence, there's also a critical diagnostic layer.
What do you mean?
Influence fails when you use the wrong psychological tool to clear the wrong psychological blockage. For example, if someone is resisting a choice because they are deeply anxious about the potential risk of failure, throwing scarcity at them will just make them panic, freeze, and shut down entirely.
Because they're already scared.
Exactly. You need authority or social proof to cure that specific anxiety. Conversely, if they aren't anxious at all, but they are just comfortable doing nothing, they are stuck in the deep mud of inertia. Authority won't help.
A doctor telling them to exercise doesn't break the inertia.
It doesn't. You need reciprocity or a small consistency commitment to break that comfort and force a tiny step forward.
It's exactly how Rasputin operated in the Russian court, stacking the ultimate, unquestionable authority of the Tsar with the extreme, carefully managed scarcity of access to the royal family.
And it perfectly maps onto our earlier look at the Dark Triad, showing us precisely which manipulative personality trait naturally leans on which of these cognitive principles to effortlessly extract compliance from their victims.
Which brings our entire exhausting, fascinating week into sharp focus. As we synthesize this capstone deep dive into the anatomy of power, we've uncovered a remarkably consistent formula across history and human behavior.
We really have.
We started the week looking at the who are historical and modern case studies of power players, the people who actually wielded this influence.
Right.
Then we examined the why, the specific personality traits, the environmental factors, and the situational chaos that allows some individuals to rise and wield influence so effortlessly over the masses.
And today,
we've locked in the how, the exact raw cognitive mechanisms and evolutionary heuristics codified brilliantly in Cialdini's 7 principles that make these tactics work on absolutely anyone equipped with a human brain.
it completes the picture perfectly. Power isn't a mystical aura. It isn't magic. It is the systematic, intentional application of deeply ingrained psychological principles to human cognitive architecture. By understanding the biological and social mechanisms of reciprocity, consistency, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity, and unity, we not only understand how massive power structures are built and maintained,
But we protect ourselves.
exactly, we develop the necessary critical awareness to recognize when these invisible levers are being pulled on our own minds.
But staring at the architecture raises a final, slightly unnerving thought. A paradox, really.
What's that?
If our brains are biologically hardwired by millions of years of evolution to fall for these heuristics simply to save time, save energy, and survive, is total immunity to influence even biologically possible without completely paralyzing our ability to make the thousands of daily decisions required to live?
That is the ultimate, inescapable question. If you turn off the autocorrect feature on your phone to avoid ever sending an embarrassing wrong word, you don't just stop making errors, you lose the ability to communicate quickly and efficiently altogether.
You sacrifice function for safety.
You do?
Something to mull over as you go about your day. Open your inbox or walk into a store. Keep these exact mechanisms, these invisible strings, pulling at your System 1 brain in mind for next week, where our deep dive will shift gears entirely to explore the Borgias and the concept of power as theater.
It's going to be a fascinating pivot.
You might find that the grand, sweeping performance on the Renaissance stage isn't so different from the subtle, automatic performance happening in your own subconscious every single day. You've agreed to things you wouldn't have agreed to if you'd had 10 more seconds to think. Now you know exactly why. See you next week.